Festival of Bharat. We are a forum that is dedicated to creating content which is Indic-centric and that serves the cause of perpetuating the civilizational principle we know as Sanatan Dharma. As we gently glide into our 75th year as an independent nation, it is important that we disabuse our minds of some of the misconceptions that we've been raised on thanks to our ex-white masters. And to that end, I'm delighted to have with me today Aman Nath ji, who is going to do just that. Aman Nath ji will shine some much needed light on how New Delhi was built and remove some of the misrepresentations that we have long cherished and have clung to. So stick around for what promises to be an engaging and enlightening conversation. Aman Nath ji is the co-founder and chairman of the Neemrana hotels chain. Neemrana's restoration projects created a new niche in the heritage hotel sector in the early 90s. Aside from being a hotelier, Aman Nath ji is a historian by education and a poet too. He's a graphic designer and copywriter. He has been part of several path-breaking advertising campaigns. He has co-written and authored 13 large format books on art, history, architecture, corporate biography, and photography. Two of his books have even won national awards. His book on Jaipur was the first Indian book to have been chosen by Christie's for worldwide distribution. In fact, two of his books are used as official gifts by the President and Prime Minister of India. That is not all. Amanji is an inveterate traveler and has contributed to many travel magazines, having walked 400 kilometers to Mount Kailash in Tibet, to a hidden monastery between Rohtang and Leh, and to the sub-Antarctic in an icebreaker. He has also won the highest civilian award in France, the Legion of Honor, given by the President of France for his work in restoration. He also won the Condé Nast Lifetime Achievement Award in 2017. Welcome, Amanji. May I just say, what an impressive bio.
Namaskar.
So, Amanji, you're based out of Delhi, am I right?
Yes.
So, can you just walk us through how things are right now in Delhi, in the aftermath of the pandemic? And has this really affected, I'm sure it has affected the hotel industry to some extent, and how are things right now?
The pandemic affected the hotel industry terribly because, to keep large hotels shut for a whole year and is problematic. But I will speak only for myself. We have managed in whichever way to keep all our people, and now we are open and doing really well. So it was well worth the wait. We took this occasion to, revamp the hotels and so on. And with the zero rate in Delhi now, I only look forward with more optimism.
Right. Amanji, before we plunge headlong into this conversation, and it's going to be extremely interesting, could you just tell us a word about yourself so people who are listening in will know where you're coming from ideologically?
I was born in New Delhi and I went to school and college in New Delhi, but I'm a restless and a nomadic sort of person. I love travel, I love people. I know India fairly well. And on your travels in India, in a very Buddha sort of way, you see the problems of people, and you cannot but not relate with them. So I think that my work, not just the books, but the restoration projects originate from a few thoughts like that. One, that, our heritage is so great and grand and we've neglected it, possibly because we are a living civilization and we continue to create. So in no other country in the world, for example, would somebody create the goddess Kali, as they do in Kolkata, in these most glorious forms, and then just a few days later, put her away in the river to go. Because that museum culture is really something that is a European thing. Dead cultures have to hang on to their things. So we feel that a lota is a lota is a lota. We don't put a lota of everyday use in a museum. Whereas Charles Eames will come from America and say, it is the most perfect design I have ever seen. But that is also important. So now that we are both Oriental and Occidental. We have Westernized to appreciate ourselves. So I think my Western liberal education and my Indian base, I stood second in Hindi in the whole of India, and I was very fond of Sanskrit. I didn't learn Latin because I feel that we need to be ourselves first before we become a part of the world and begin to impress it. So I have no complexes on any count, and I'm delighted that I do what I do.
Right. So you're a Sanatani with a global orientation.
No, I'm not actually. My family are Arya Samajis, and my great-grandfather was one of the prominent members of the Punjab. He was one of the founders of the Punjab National Bank, of the DAV colleges, and he wrote 5 of the niyams of the Arya Samaj, which were the progressive niyams relating to the education of girls, the eating of meat, and akhadas and so on for physical exercise. And he was the president of the Arya Samaj in Lahore, which, as you know, was the Paris of the Orient.
Right. Yes. Wonderful. So Amanji, without wasting further time, let's get down to the meat of the matter. So, your book, The Dome Over India, is an extremely researched, detailed book on the Rashtrapati Bhavan. And it also brings to light several facts about Lutyens, the man who is believed to be the genius behind Delhi. So, which we will get to in a bit. But I would like to know how did you get around to writing this book? What were the circumstances that led you to writing this book? And what kind of research did you have to put in order to bring this book to life? Because there's a lot of material in there, packaged in there.
My education, my master's was in medieval Indian history. And that obviously doesn't bring it up to this period. But after my Jaipur book came out, what did happen was that President Clinton visited India, and the President of India gave him that book. Then he went to Rajasthan. The Chief Minister of Rajasthan and the Tourism Minister of Rajasthan also presented him the same Jaipur book. So, and each of them phoned me to say, because they were very happy they'd given my book. And I felt bad for President Clinton and for India, really, because I said, is he going to go back and say there's no other book in India? It was several years ago. It came out in 94.
Was it 98 that he visited in India? 99, was it? Bill Clinton visited India?
I don't remember the year, but there weren't other big books around. It's a large book, and it opens and becomes 4 feet. It's very sumptuous. Then one day I get a call from President Narayanan's daughter to say that they were having a family lunch and they'd like me to come. So I said, I didn't know I was your family, but I went, and it was the president's birthday that day. And we were about 6-8 people, actually like family, sitting and having lunch. And after lunch, the president said, do you know the gardens, the Mughal gardens? I said, yes, sir, I've been there as a child, because we enter from the other side. We don't enter from the president's. He said, come and walk with me. And as we walked, he very warmly put his arm around me on my shoulder, which is a normal practice in India. But when the president puts his arm around you, you feel a little, awed, if I might say, or I wondered. He said, I want to ask you for a favor. So I wondered what favor I could do. And he said, I'd like you to do a book on Rashtrapati Bhavan. So that's how it came to be. But I said, sir, I think you're now about to retire. So it was on the 26th of October, I think was his birthday. And then it took a little while to get the things in order, to sign the papers. And I started on the 1st of January, and the book finished in 6 months. And it was, so when in London, it was released by Mr. Swaraj Paul at a wonderful gathering of people. The Lutyens Trust and all were there. They were just dazzled by the book, and they said, you must have been working 10 years on it. So I said, not really, 6 months. So then I had letters from Gavin Stamp, who was from the University of Glasgow, a great specialist of Edwin Lutyens. He said, your book you should regard your book as a triumph. It is truly impressive. And he wrote in a review that it's no longer possible to do a book like this in England anymore. And we salute the vision of the President's Secretariat to commission a book like this.
Right.
And they also greatly appreciated the text. And I wrote it very consciously because I was writing of England, so my English is, well, it is what it is. But I wrote it even a little self-consciously that it's going to be read by a British audience.
Yes.
And they said to me, you write better English than us, it's better designed than us. So it was, I've actually done 17 books, but of all the books, this book got the best reviews from the Royal Academy of, from the British architects and all that. So which left me, I was humbled, to know that we can produce this. And Gavin Stamp, who was a generous and wonderful man, he said, I'm glad I was able to help a little because, people write and you just answer a little bit. But he said, I mean, there are things in this book which I never imagined existed. There are insights in this book about Lutyens which are new for me. So that was nice for me. So
that's what we're going to be talking about today. That's going to be the sum and substance of today's conversation.
Yes, I want to talk from a position of strength and of knowledge, not just misconceptions which are being floated all over the place.
Right, right. So therefore, now it comes to, brings me to the very pertinent question, which is, can you tell us a little bit about Lutyens? What, who was he? Where did he come from? And, the name is bandied about in our conversations about Delhi, but little is really known about his background. So, how did he, for example, land the job of designing New Delhi? Like, how did that come about? So if you could just throw some light on that.
So Edwin Lutyens, his family came from Europe and settled in London. And he was the last of 14 children or something, but he was a very sickly child. So he never went to school. He was educated at home by his elder brother and sister, but he had prodigious talent, creative talent. And when you're passionate by something, you learn it better than you do. Like, I'm not an architect, I'm often introduced as an architect because my work is connected to restoration for reuse. I take old buildings, yes, and turn them around. So he also, but then he did study eventually when he grew up because, his legs became stronger, he couldn't play, etc. And his health did trouble him even while he was working in Delhi in the heat, he had dysentery, and he fought that. So he was not a very, very strong person, but he got married to Emily Lutyens, and Emily was the daughter of Lord Lytton.
Oh.
And Lord Lytton was the first Governor General of India. So at one point, when Calcutta was becoming very argumentative, problematic, revolutionary, because the Bengalis had been educated. So they started to fight for their rights, demand them, take the government to court. They thought that it's better to go to a little more innocent area and impress them. And so they chose Delhi because Delhi has always been the seat of power. There are, actually there are 12 cities of Delhi. I don't know why people always say 7. And New Delhi was to be the 12th. So when this plan was made, it was kept terribly secret from everybody. Only the Governor General, the King Emperor, and the Secretary of State knew about this. The King Emperor writes that he didn't even tell his wife because he says ladies tend to fritter away what you've told them to hide. So, yes. So,
well, you object, but
I know you look.
Nevertheless,
I'm not saying this. It's said by the King Emperor. He said that they can't keep a secret, so that's allowed. So then what happened was, but of course, the Governor General talked to his wife, and the wife talked to the son-in-law, and their son-in-law was Edwin Lutyens. Edwin Lutyens was a completely, not completely unknown. He had done a few houses country houses for English people, and was known because of the society in which he roamed. He knew the gentry of England, and he had made a few houses for them. But as it happened, he had trained for 6 years in the office of Herbert Baker. Herbert Baker was much more senior to him, had a fabulous reputation, and had designed the capital of Pretoria in South Africa, which was the great rage because it had scale, it had pillars, and so on. And today, when we look at Rashtrapati Bhavan, what was then called Great Place, which is now called Vijay Chowk, and look at the pillars of South Block and North Block, which are designed by Herbert Baker, it echoes the same Pretoria of that time. So because he knew him and had worked under him, he writes an innocent letter to Baker to say that the commissioning of a capital in New Delhi there is offering, I hear of it. Shall we enter the competition together? So Baker then is full of work because he's at the top of his career. He said, okay, let us. So they enter as Baker, Lutyens, and party.
Interesting.
And then when they visit this place or when they're chosen, Baker gets, 3 times the daily allowance that he gets because one is the boss and one is an assistant. Right. So at the early stages, he plays that game. He plays second fiddle, and the big commission is then given to them. They set up office here, and the expenses of the office again, because these are all things to show the relative status of people. Baker was much higher, so he took much more money for running his office, and Edwin Lutyens accepted less because the North Block and the South Block are designed by Baker. That the Great Place is designed by him, and but by and by, because Lutyens was very manipulative, he managed to edge him out, and eventually Herbert Baker has a breakdown, nervous breakdown, and he leaves India, and then Edwin Lutyens gets more free flow to do what he wants, and so we know of him more than we know of Baker. And there's much more to it. For example, if you look at the different aspects of a city, since we're talking about the architect, we had been taught, our education had been taught, to look away from the greatness of our past, to be ashamed of it, even if it could be. So, and become impressed by European architecture. So if you look at 19th and 20th century architecture, the great grand palaces of the Maharajas, you will find nothing. Padmanabhapuram, for example, is 1757 or something. It's just when the black hole happens in Calcutta, that's when Padmanabhapuram comes to an end. So, or we have Stoke Palace, which is up in the north in Leh, which again, predates the British. After the coming of the British, all the monumental buildings are European because we by then got a complex that we are not sufficient.
We're not sophisticated enough.
Yeah, so and to a people where we have such extraordinary architecture. If you look at the architecture of the Chalukyas, the Rashtrakutas, the Cholas, Hoysalas, everything. Each of it is so extraordinary. So, but Lutyens arrives here and he says that India has no architecture at all.
Unbelievable.
So the Lord Hardinge, who was then Governor General, for whom I have actually much more respect than I would have for Edwin Lutyens, he says to him, please travel and see. So he goes around, he comes back, and from every, he sees the Taj Mahal and he says architecture begins where the Taj ends.
Yes.
Things like this.
That was my next question, Amanji. My question was, so as a designer and an architect, what were his sources of inspiration? Because now that you mention it, we have always been told that, we are always taught, or there's a lot of talk about the uniquely Indian character of his buildings that have been designed by Lutyens. So what is the truth in that? And how much research did he do? Because going by what you say, he pretty much seems to have wongled this job of designing New Delhi. So how much truth is there in the fact that he designed the buildings with an understanding of the Indian ethos? Is there any truth in that?
He actually thought very little of Indian architecture, as I've said. He was a very reluctant researcher in the field. So he was pushed by Lord Hardinge. He said, go to Lahore, go to Simla, go to Agra, go to see the Mughal gardens.
And Hardinge was the Governor General at the time.
He was the Governor General, and he was the boss actually.
Right.
He would say that I represent the King Emperor in Delhi. So I am the client. If there will be credit, I will get it. If there will be blame, I will get it. So I'm answerable. So please listen to me. And Lutyens played up to him. You know, he would go up and flatter him and keep him in his good books. And Baker was very busy working, so he didn't do that. And there was, for the commission of the Rashtrapati Bhavan, the Governor General's house, there was a competition. And there was another British architect called Lancaster who did a fabulous design. But Lancaster was rough, you know, as good creative people are. And he put off the Governor General, whereas Edwin Lutyens flattered him. And there are interesting examples. He goes to meet Lord Hardinge one day, and there's a lotus paperweight lying on his table. And he picks it up and he said, isn't that beautiful? Could I borrow this because it's going to inspire me to design the tower, you know, what is called the Jaipur column. So others also did the design. So now when the designs appear before the Governor General, he's biased in favor of the tower designed from his paperweight. It's not, and which is chosen. So he did lots of tricks like this and flattered the right people. But whenever something was done, when he was, you know, he would use other people's designs and make them his own. So there is this wonderful scholar on Lutyens called Roderick Gradage. And Roderick Gradage was a biographer. He also came to India at the asking of the Lutyens Trust. And he followed the track of Lutyens. And he writes that although the plan of Delhi was a group effort, it is attributed to Lutyens.
Right. There were many other architects, like you rightly pointed out, who were...
Yeah, no, and not only. So if we take, let's say, the plan. So when Hardinge asked for a plan of Delhi from him, he came with a plan of roads that cross, you know, like a grid plan, like New York is. Yes, it's left, you know, east, west, north, south roads. So Hardinge tells him, so Hardinge was a very fine boss because he was giving a very precise brief. And when he was off the mark, he was correcting him. So we shall talk about it. I would call Hardinge the designer of New Delhi, not Lutyens, because he was reluctant. He was saying, no, this I don't like. He said, do it. And he made him do it. So at the end of his life, you know, 6 years before Edwin Lutyens dies, his conscience finally catches up with him. And he says something which is actually a very, very direct compliment to him, you know. And I'd like to read that for you.
Yes.
It says, King George V had written to Hardinge that his name would always be identified as the founder of New Delhi, but his words have not proved prophetic. Lord Hardinge, as the founder, has largely been obscured by Lutyens' fame as the architect of New Delhi. It is always Lutyens' Delhi, never Hardinge's. There was much tension between them, Hardinge calling Lutyens obstinate as a mule, and Lutyens deriding him for trespassing into the architectural arena. Hardinge deserves a large measure of the credit for the new city. Lutyens' warm tribute in 1933, which referred to him as a conceiver and founder of New Delhi, finally acknowledged the Viceroy's contribution. And so he writes, the new city, this is Lutyens writing, finally when he says that, you know, he's like Guru.
Correct.
Yes. Even a moment, you know, when you're dying, you write.
Yeah, his last confession.
Yeah. He says, and this I owe to Gavin Stamp, because Roderick Gradage had passed away. And he said, there are lots of papers and photocopies. Can I send it to you? And just by the way, arrived these papers when the book was being printed. And I was delighted to find this missing link because it says, Lutyens is saying, the new city owes its being to Lord Hardinge, his patience and courage in times of great stress, personal and political. His even temper in the midst of diverse discussion remains in my memory as being parallel only with the greatness of his conception.
Wow.
So he's saying that, you know, Harding conceived it and briefed it. So let's take the plan, for example, of Delhi, of which I said, which was a joint effort. So when he brings this New York plan, Harding says, I've lived in these parts, and I know that when the dust storms blow, you know, the dust will just flow through. So I want you to design a city with roundabout avenues with trees, so that this is broken and deflected. Then he says to me, okay, wait, I'm going to get you the map of Washington, of Paris, and of Canberra. Canberra was newly built, which is not the most beautiful city, but Washington and Paris are both beautiful.
Definitely beautiful.
And very beautiful even. So he then lifts those two and combines them and makes Delhi is a mixture of Washington and Paris. And the fun is that it's a pale copy of Paris, because the Arc de Triomphe, which we see, which it's so splendid, is the India Gate, which is much cleaner. The Champs-Élysées. The Kingsway is the Champs-Élysées. Because in their correspondence, you know, so we will come to that maybe.
So yeah, that's actually my next question, because you know, there was you know, this age-old French, Anglo-French rivalry and, you know, hostilities, and for a long time. So did that play a part also in sort of shaping Lutyens' design? Did it influence him in any way in how he designed New Delhi? Was there some sort of French complex?
Absolutely, indeed. But just one thing I think which got left out, which was about the bungalows, because we were talking about Lutyens. So what we call LBZ, Lutyens Bungalow Zone, should really be LBW, because it's leg before wicket. It's completely wrong. If I was to ask you, how many of the bungalows in the Lutyens Bungalow Zone are made by Lutyens, what would your answer be from whatever little you know? There were, let's say, 5,000 bungalows. So how many would it?
My conservative estimate will be around, I don't know, 30, 40?
No, it's called Lutyens Bungalow Zone. So, you know.
So there should be more than that.
There should have been a few thousand, you know.
But now that you asked me, I'm teetering towards, you know, a fewer number, but there should be. I mean, logically.
Okay, no, but the answer is zero.
Well,
so
now
that is quite shocking, you see. So what he has built are 3 bungalows inside the president's bodyguards estate, you know, which is for the Surgeon General, the private secretary, and so on. He's built the palaces of Baroda and Hyderabad, which are on the hexagon, and he's built the governor's house. That's it. But there is an architect called Robert Torr Russell, who you've never heard of, have you?
No, not at all.
So Robert Torr Russell built Connaught Place, Eastern Court, Western Court, Safdarjung Enclave, and the National Stadium, which was then called Irving Stadium. They're all iconic and amazing buildings. And on top of that, he built 4,000 bungalows.
Imagine.
But nobody's heard of him. And then we have a whole lot of fabulous architects, you know, who work within the office and outside the office of Lutyens. You know, there's W.H. Nichols, there's C.G. and F.B. Blomfield, there's Walter Sykes George, there's Arthur Gordon, there is Shoesmith, Henry Maid. Nobody's heard of them. Exactly. So one of the problems in India, and I think that problem is with us, because we can't blame anybody else for it, that we are so ignorant of our history. We know nothing about it. So in the year 1969, which was the centenary year of Lutyens, and his popularity was at its lowest at that point in England. They couldn't raise enough funds at RIBA to organize an exhibition of his work. So, but then somehow, because his work is here, the British Council managed to bring an exhibition to us. I was in college at that point, And I remember going to see it. And then we were called to tea at the British High Commission. As kids, you know, it was an event to be called to the British High Commissioners because we had, you know, we were colonized people, our psyche continued to be colonized then, even today it is. And over there, the MCD and all these people who were, you know, sort of bending and stretching before the Brits, they announced, you know, to become that we've done this fantastic exhibition. We are going to name this area Lutyens Bungalow Zone. But none of them knew that he had built no bungalow over there. So that kind of exhibition, ignorance is unacceptable. And even Baker built 7 bungalows and the north and south blocks. And Lutyens, making fun of his boss and senior, he called them bungalows, you know, like he bungled them, you know. So that was his sense of humor for other people, but for himself, he had none. Indo-French relationship is tangled with much love, hate, envy, aspiration, and so on. And this has a long history with the 100-year war, which the French won against the British. It's something that they were never reconciled to. So if you look at the royal insignia of England, the credo on the garter, you know, bears the insignia, "Honi soit qui mal y pense," means evil to him who thinks evil. Or as we say, "Buri nazar wale tera muh kala," is what is written on the garter, the credo of the garter of the insignia. And at the bottom, again in French, it says, "Dieu est mon droit," God and my right. So they looked up to the French language, also because everybody didn't understand it.
Right.
You know? So when you get somebody from outside, you look up to that.
The value goes up. Right.
So French was given it was a court language also at some point, you know, and it could have been Latin. But in Scotland, for example, on their insignia, they have Latin and English because they don't have any connection.
How does this French obsession affect Lutyens? That's the question.
So it's a psychological study, actually, really. The English publicly derided what they discreetly admired. So, for example, you know, the French, when they go to Paris, and the British, when they go to Paris, love the Champs-Élysées. But Sir Harcourt Butler, after whom the Butler schools are named in Delhi, he commented, he is saying, in India, we must have space. We couldn't breathe with the Champs-Élysées. This is, I mean, a statement he makes. So he's saying that the Champs-Élysées is claustrophobic. And so in India, we need space. Right. And this is obviously not an honest statement from the heart, because nobody's ever gone to the Champs-Élysées and said, "Ooh, fun."
It's claustrophobic. Right?
Yeah, you know? And so, in Lutyens also, Lutyens is wanting to do a palace like Versailles. Okay? And he says, as a work of art, Versailles cannot be compared to our Hampton Court. Okay? French, so, which is again a falsity.
Absolutely.
And then in his lifetime, he says the École des Beaux-Arts in France, in Paris, is wonderful. Let's try and do an English version of that. They try and do that. It fails, you know. And when he goes to Paris, he travels with his sketchbook. He's absolutely enamored. So the history of classicism in England is that they had no architecture. You know, they had no, I mean, the Roman architecture was bricks, aqueducts, all those kind of things. And in 1583 is born this man called Inigo Jones, and he brings Italian Renaissance architecture of the Baroque period to England by building some churches. And there's one more architect who joins him after that. And they then start to give England a past in a way. So when Lutyens comes here, his brief is to intimidate us.
Right, with this Roman, French kind of a, yeah.
So he chooses a style. Roman architecture is 1,400 years old. And so, and then they write articles, Sir Robert Byron and all these people bring volumes, and then they say modernism, how modern is this building and all that. How are you calling a 1400-year-old Roman style, which has no connection with Italy, because, with England, because Rome is in Italy, built in India, just because, you know, he went to Genoa and sketched the staircase, which is made inside the, you know, the entrance for the common people. So that kind of complex continued. And the most interesting story is that in 1931, Rashtrapati Bhavan is ready. A big party happens, all right? So what do? So they've copied the plan of Washington, which happened to be made by a Frenchman called Charles L'Enfant. So they've got a French plan. They're standing on this building in which they were measuring, this is bigger than Versailles, this is bigger that, which is again measuring again Versailles. And they pop champagne, which is again French, and the fountains are playing in Rashtrapati Bhavan. They looked eastwards towards India Gate. They raise a toast, and Lord Irwin says, this is what Versailles must have looked like, which meant now we've arrived in style.
And this is from a culture that had denounced Versailles and saying that it wasn't.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. So this hypocrisy, they're publicly deriding it, but secretly they're in love with it.
Secretly, yes. which also was true of some of the, you know, of their relationship with India too.
Yes, yes,
absolutely. That they obsessed about, like the early Raj period, and then eventually they started, you know, repudiating it. So eventually, Amanji, what were the core influences? Did he use any, like, I mean, now we know from what you tell us that, you know, he had a very poor opinion of Indian architecture, but ultimately there is a whiff of Indianness to the architecture that we see in the Rashtrapati Bhavan or some of the buildings. So eventually, did he use any of the Indian influences? What were they?
No, he was compelled to use it, because when he comes here and he rejects all architecture, he says the Taj Mahal is imperfect, etc. Then he says that only the Roman architecture is acceptable to him, right? And therefore he was going to make a copy of the Church of Rome. I have drawings of that. He made a copy and he said, here is the dome, you know, there's a central dome, the other dome, and this will be in white marble. And the Viceroy will live in it. I will remodel the interiors to make a bedroom here or something. Yeah, it won't be a church inside. So, which is quite shocking, you know. So Harding says to him, this is unacceptable to me. You are building for the Indian people, and we were paying the money for it. So he said, you must build something which will make the Indians civilizationally proud of what we are building. And then he forces him to go to Sanchi to see this, and to see the Sanchi Stupa, which is the dome. And he then goes to Rajasthan, and he, you know, the chhatris there around the dome. It's actually a very complex design. Then he goes to Mandu, and he comes back and says, it's one of those useless places, these useless buildings built for useless people who had nothing to do, because he looks at the Charokas. And the whole facade of Rashtrapati Bhavan is actually the Jahaz Mahal at Mandu, which is arches, and here he uses pillars. But I have no enmity with Lutyens, you know. I mean, if I praise Harding, I can praise him too. They were two Englishmen and we were colonized by them. But I don't like the injustice in the recording of history or our perception of history. So I want to say that the genius of Lutyens was then, because he was forced to, against his will, do this, that he did it fairly well. I mean, there are things he did fairly well. For example, you know, on the top of Rashtrapati Bhavan, you know, in our buildings, we have chhatris. We have 4 pillars or 6 pillars or 8 pillars and a canopy. So he found his canopies useless, as he says in his comments when he comes back from Mandu. So he turns it upside down. He removes the pillars, he just puts the dome, and they become bowls on the terrace, which become fountains.
Wow.
So they were meant to be, they were never really used because they never worked, the plumbing, etc. didn't work. And then when India became independent, it looked too much of a folly, you know, for a democratic president to live in that kind of palace.
Fountains.
Yeah, all over the place. And then there were famines, there was drought, you know. So you can't have
that opulence. Yeah.
Yes. So Raja Gopalachari, who was Gandhiji's Samadhi, was the first Indian Governor General. And he was a very simple man. He looked like Gandhi, but a diminutive Gandhi. He wore dhoti kurta. And he arrives in Rashtrapati Bhavan and they say, this is your bedroom. They take him to the bedroom of Lord Mountbatten, which is huge with big beds. So he said, we just got rid of the British. I don't want to sleep in their bed, you know. So he says, isn't there some other place I can go? So he walks around the whole place. He's Governor General. Everybody's following him. And he goes to the other wing where the maids used to stay. Because we must remember that the Governors General were not old people. They were young people who came like IAS officers on probation or in mid something. So they had young children and nannies. So there was a wing for the nannies and the children. And Raja Gopalachari said, this suits me. So he slept there. And from that day till today, all the presidents sleep in the nanny's room.
Wow. This is fascinating, Amanji. I mean, I don't know about others, but I didn't know this. And it's just so truly fascinating.
My book came out, 15, 20 years ago.
Yeah, it's been out for a while. True.
It's been out, but what is a handicap is that it's gifted. Some presidents prefer not to put it in the market because it's a state gift given to every head of state.
Right.
But I've written about this in magazines and people don't even read that. So let me quickly run through some other things which you asked me about Lutyens. One is the choosing of the site. Okay, so people think that he chose the site. He fought tooth and nail with the Governor General to choose Malcha Palace. Malcha Palace is something we also don't know very well in Delhi. There is Sardar Patel Marg, which we now know, which leads to the airport from the Rashtrapati Bhavan, let's say. And somewhere in the jungle of that on the ridge is a Malcha Palace, which is a flat area with some rocks. So Lutyens, and he would get one or two people with him so that he would lobby for it. You know, there was Swinton Jacob, who was a British architect of whose purpose in this commission was to look after the Indianization of the design and to look at the materials. Okay, so he took him and he said, this is the place. But then Lutyens goes around to see the place with other people who had a different vision. There was this man called Ward, there was Gordon, and there was Goumet. There were three people. They went around and surveyed the place, and they said it's much better to be on Raisina Hill because we want to look down on a vista. So he insisted, and then it was chosen. And the idea was that from this vista, you would look at the Jamuna River, which is where the old fort is, and the Jamuna River beyond. And there was a plan to dam it and bring the water forward. So when you stood here, you would see the water. But then the world wars broke out and the budgets were cut. And Lord Irwin became the viceroy at the time when this was happening. And Lord Irwin was busy putting his name to the city. You know, he said, how do I fit myself in this city? So Rashtrapati Bhavan was ready. The foundation stone had long been laid. So he then went up on the dome and put a stone there saying the last stone of Rashtrapati Bhavan. So it says Irwin laid the last stone. And then that stadium, which called the National Stadium, was called Irwin Stadium. And he planted it in a very important place because Lutyens was not in the picture then. And so that it blocked the view to the old fort. So there's a lot of history and a lot of...
Right. This is very, very fascinating, Amanji.
Yes, and one more thing if you want to say. So then when Lutyens started to say that I'm going to build a Roman building and I don't want anything Indian in it, Swinton Jacob was actually very upset and he resigned from his job. Beautiful. He said that I cannot tomorrow be laughed at because my job was to Indianize this building. And here this man is going to build Rome over here. So when he resigns, then Harding realizes that this man is a stubborn man. So he takes on the charge of Indianizing the building and making sure that all the elements that you see are there. And so you'd asked that question already, actually. So the dome is the Sanchi Stupa, which is Buddhist. But in the drawings, I hope we can show them in your program. In the first drawing, there's this building and there's just a little dome. So it doesn't show much because the stupa is not like that. It's just a flat kind of thing. And when Baker's buildings come up, the North Block and the South Block, and their domes are proportionate to the European standards, and you go back at a distance and look at the whole countryside, then the Rashtrapati Bhavan got dwarfed because it's further away.
Correct.
So Lutyens got a balloon, because there were no drones those days. So he got a balloon, he sat in it, he went up to see the perspective, which you can't see otherwise, and realized that Baker's domes are so big and his was tiny. Yes, and his whole thing was a fight with Baker. He wanted to dominate him, which historically he succeeded.
Which is what he has done.
Which he has done, because of our ignorance also.
Yeah.
So then he raised the drum of the Rashtrapati Bhavan by 6 meters, which is a lot. So when you now look at it, after I've told you this, you have a narrow building, and the dome is 2.5 times the proportion of its base, of that building.
Yes,
which is completely wrong. And when he's talking about the Taj Mahal being, not architecture, I did an analysis in my book. The Taj Mahal is a perfect equilateral triangle seen from its platform to its dome, and then from its pishtak on top, which is that gateway to the dome. They're 2 equilateral triangles. And if you draw the same triangles on the work of Edwin Lutyens, they go like that and like that, the sort of,
tapering edges, yes.
They're not correct.
Right.
So then we've talked about...
I just want to say, my next question is, I think, very pertinent because it's very current and it's a hot topic. So this brings me to this important, question of, this subject is very important, Amanji, because it sets the context for something that is, like I said, very pertinent today, the Central Vista project, right? So people say that the Central Vista project will destroy the heritage of the new city of Delhi, New Delhi, and the character of the city, and so on and so forth. Now, your extensive, your exhaustive, what you've just told us has proven that there is a lot that we actually don't know about the city, and some of the things that we've been fed are not really true. So, what have you got to say about this contention that some people have, that with this project, the Central Vista project, the heritage and the character of the city will be lost? What is your stand on that?
I think that, people would have normally accepted it, but there has been a conscious misinformation plan in the press. And I think they talked about all this toolbox that the Congress government did. And the Western media is very receptive to the Congress government for a host of reasons, because of Mr. Nehru and his eminence in Indira Gandhi, and then Sonia Gandhi and so on. So when they send out something, they take it very literally. So there's been a lot of misinformation. It's hard to address in such a small program, but maybe I could take just one example of The Guardian in London. So, The Guardian was a weekly which was started in 1821, and it became a daily in 1855. Starting from one corner, and it became a prominent newspaper. So their motto is that comment is free, but facts are sacred. All right, and in all these platitudes that they flaunt from their high horse, they say that they produce trustworthy journalism, offering a counterweight to the spread of misinformation. It can't be more ironic that they have spread more misinformation on this subject than anybody could imagine. So they come out, they get Anish Kapoor, who is a sculptor, installation maker, who was educated in Doon School, Dehradun, where I taught briefly. He's a person I'm acquainted with on his visits to Delhi, and the whole world looks up to him because he's done amazing optical illusions. He's placed 11-meter steel mirrors in the countryside outside the Rockefeller Center, and he's got the kind of reviews he gets, you cannot imagine. So suddenly we get a heading which says, then what happens is he gets knighted by the Queen on her birthday. And I was really wondering, why would Anish Kapoor, what does knighting mean? The Queen puts sword on your shoulder. You know, she doesn't poke you in the eye. She doesn't make you blind. So when you are born in India, know India so well, how can you suddenly on the 4th of June, you know, people open the newspaper and they are shocked to say that, you know, Hindu Taliban Modi raises Lutyens' parliament, you know. I mean, there were 4 mistakes in the headline itself, you know.
Yes.
The parliament is not made by Lutyens, it's made by Harvard Baker. And he said this is Islamophobia, whatever, of Modi. It has no Islamic influence. It is actually inspired from a Chhattis Yogini temple, which is circular, which are in Madhya Pradesh, which have pillars, which Baker is reputed to have visited, and we have evidence of all this. So where are all these facts coming from, you know? And the Guardian prints this on the 4th of June and keeps this for 2 weeks before withdrawing it after the damage is done. So people are then on the WhatsApp universe.
Already up in arms about it, yes.
Everybody's saying, and I have a nephew in Paris who rings me and says, it's a shame, you know, that all the trees are going. I said, you know, not one tree is going. And since we're talking trees, it'll be interesting. I'll tell you that my maternal grandfather worked for the British government, and it was a tender was floated to plant the trees, which he won. So all the trees that people are talking about were grown by my maternal grandfather. And there was a Britisher called Mustoe, and M-U-S-T-O-E. And my grandfather was called Meyer. He was called H.N.S. Meyer, which sounds rather like the name of a ship or something. So if I was an adult at that moment, I would have written a little book called Mustoe and Meyer, giving to the British and the Indian who grow it. So talking about trees again, there was an amazing man called Clutterbuck.
Clutterbuck, yes.
Clutterbuck, who lived, there is a Clutterbuck Bagh in Allahabad. He was the greatest Indian specialist of Indian trees in horticulture, and Harding looked up to him. So Harding asks him for help. He produces a list of 97 Indian trees, you know, jamun and mango and whatever. And of course, Edwin Lutyens is not happy, you know, because he wanted to put English shrubs.
English trees.
The usual story. So he says, he goes and meets the Governor General behind his back, and he says, these trees are not going to last more than 10, 15 years. And they were planted because Harding didn't listen to him. And it's going to be 100 years, because from 1931, you know, it'll be 2031, and they're flourishing, and it's a forest. You know?
And they're not going anywhere.
They're not going anywhere. So I actually was very upset, because I also read The Guardian here and there, and you know, it comes out of Farrington Road. And I said on the 4th of June, when they published this nonsense article, their address should be changed to Fartington Road. You know? Yes, because they have no business to, write rubbish about India, rubbish about our prime minister.
And that is poor journalism on their part too, because, and this is something that is happening with all the big names in journalism, in the print medium. If you look at, you know, Washington Post or the New York Times, I think they're just taking things for granted and really they're misrepresenting the news. So I think, I think they need to be taken on at some point. I agree.
And then it's not an apology. Even now it's on the net. In fact, I think you should show it in your program. And at 6 point in the middle, it says on the 17th of June or whatever, this was withdrawn. But the damage is done, because once people read something, you know, they
absolutely. But Amanji, just quickly, if you could just tell us this, because this is important, that the Congress too, like for example, Nehru himself. I think he rooted for the, he himself wanted I think VP Radhakrishna's home to be pulled down or something for the.
Yes. Right? No, you're right. I think that's a very good question, because I think that we're asking all the wrong questions. You know, the press is saying, why does Prime Minister Modi's megalomania need such a big house, etc.? Hello, he is the Prime Minister of 1.3 billion people, the world's largest democracy. He needs to have a home which merits the status, the security, the convenience of the Prime Minister of India. And the question should not be this. I think the question should be, why did the Congress fossilize Teen Murti House into a museum? You know,
Right.
because if we are so concerned about museums are actually more actively made in dead civilizations, as I said earlier. You know, we are a living civilization, and if we say, you know, if Britain has to make a, you know, a church which falls down, they'll have a lot of difficulty in erecting it. Whereas if the Taj Mahal fell down, or if the Ellora cave something happened, we have the craftsmen, we have descendants of those people, we have the materials, we have the skills. We're a living civilization, you know. So Teen Murti House should never have been made into a museum, because, you know, if you stand at Rashtrapati Bhavan, in fact, maybe we should have done this right in the beginning. You know, the building is the head of government, it's the Governor General of that time. So on his left is God, because there's the church, and on his right is the house of the military commander, because, you know, you can't rule without power and guns. So you had God, guns, and government, and then the parliament later, because when, you know, they had to be, and the vista was the king's way, because he was a living king, George V. And his father, Edward VIII, was on the left, sorry, and on the right is George VI, his son, who is the father of Queen Elizabeth. Right. So when, long before Modi, there was a fabulous collection of Asiatic antiquities of Dr. Aurel Stein, and he that was housed in a museum which was made, which is near where the National Museum now is, and that building existed. So Nehru ordered the knocking of that building to make the National Museum and put that. So this has already happened once.
It's already happened, right?
It's already happened once. And so let's talk museum first here. So now it's going, because that museum has 35 lakh square meters of space. Right. But it's going to the North Block, South Block, to the Parliament, which all this is going to have 1,25,000 square meters of space. So is 35,000 or 1,25,000?
It's much more.
So the press is saying, you know, culture is being squashed into a little corner, and they're saying things like all the art treasures would break, and what will happen? What happens when India sends its treasure to the Smithsonian, to Australia, to the British Museum? They are packed and sent. So if we can send them across the 7 seas to all the continents and all the world, why can't we send them?
I believe they did it in Cairo also, Amanji. They did transfer I think they were recent.
That's what I'm saying. This is sensationalism to say that we suddenly become incompetent if I have to walk from my bed to my sofa, but I can swim across 7 seas and reach there. So I think that, and people are influenced by these kind of things. I think that they should be, and the government is, I think, very intently working on the mission that it is doing. It has perhaps not played its cards well in doing enough public relations, but an honest person doesn't need to go on saying, I'm honest, I'm doing the right thing. 51 ministries are going to be assembled in one place in a country where people say so difficult to get anything done from the government. You know, I have friends in government at all levels. They come for a meeting from outside, you know, from the suburb of Delhi. Then they say, oh, we've got to see the minister again after lunch, again after 11 o'clock. Now let's hang around here. There's so much waste of time, and there's so much communication, so much traffic. Now there'll be internal, you know, underground passages. What is the objection of people for all these buildings being broken down? And besides, in 1983, INTAC made a list of the buildings of any importance. I incidentally happened to be the youngest founder member of INTAC when it was founded, when Rajiv Gandhi was Prime Minister, and my first book was being published in Oxford by Blacker. And I came back with, the papers of the National Trust, Net Popul Jaikar, Martan Singh, Rajiv Gandhi, and said we should do something like this. And they said that they were already working on something like this. So together we worked on making this.
So Amanji, why is the world up in arms about Central Vista? I mean, why is it that everybody in the world has an opinion about it when this is really an internal matter?
I think that India should take it as a compliment that we are center stage in the minds of everybody, you know. But the fact that it's a negative center stage is what concerns me. You know, you're right. It is our internal business. So if they're going to widen the Champs-Élysées or make a tunnel under it, does Mr. Modi and does all the environmentalists say the Champs-Élysées should be saved and all this? You know, I mean, it's our business. But and besides, we're not doing any of those things that they're imagining we are doing. So it's a very good question. I'd like to enjoy and answer that. I have a very good friend called Guy Sorman, who is a public intellectual in France. He lectures also in Europe. He had also sent me a mail saying that you know, scholars, architects, economists are at each other's throats on this issue, world over, you know. Everybody has a view, everybody wants to share it, everybody wants to write about it, you know. So isn't it curious? And then I have another friend called William J.R. Curtis. He is a great specialist of world architecture. He's done encyclopedias. And I designed a book for him 30 years ago, where he couldn't find any designer to work for, to understand the simplicity. He was writing a book on V.V. Doshi of Ahmedabad. And I designed that book those days by cutting and pasting because there was no computers, and it won the Best Design Award. So William Curtis and I have a very good relationship. You know, he wrote to me saying that it was in December, during the lockdown in 2020, he's saying that I should sign a petition that the whole world was outraged that one home, and 18 dormitories built by Louis Khan at the IIMA, in the Indian Institute of Management in Ahmedabad, were being knocked down because they were a world treasure. Okay, so you know, I can actually reason anything from both sides. Like you have a debate, you know, you can vote for it or against it. I didn't sign it because you know, there are different ways to deal with architecture. And since we're talking about the Central Vista, you can either make a new capital outside, you know, all right? And which means that it changes the whole chemistry, etc. of the city. Or you can do another thing, you can do a part, you know, you can take the old part, which is maybe the oldest part, which is not very functional at that moment, like Paris did, you know, and then make it modern, make some big arteries, because suppose there's a fire or there's a riot or there's some problem in the old part, you can't reach it. So you have to have fire tenders and put all the things like parkings, sewage, water, all underground, because they are functional things. So that kind of revamp is what to do. So so actually what India is doing a combination of all the three things. Nothing is outrageous about it. It's raising that which is redundant and not of any importance. Nirman Bhavan and Shastri Bhavan. Yeah.
It's been done across the world in different cities time and again. So it's not like
if you look at Berlin, you look at there's so many examples of it, you know, all over the place. Brasilia being the new city and Paris being in Manhattan, they saved the village, you know, the village. But then what happens is that when the place becomes chic, you know, then the prices go up. Correct. And the whole gentrification of the interior happens, you know, the slums become the chic places to stay. Correct. So there's much to be said in everything. But when these things are done abroad, for example, when President Mitterrand was voted in 1981, by 83 he had set up a plan to make 8 buildings in Paris. Okay? And when he thought of, you know, the Grand Arche, the Opera, and all those 8 things, so there they called it monumental urbanism.
Right. So
Here we can't call it. We can't call it monumental urbanism here, because actually the buildings are going, the parking lots are going, and they're becoming just a little wider, and the parking is going underneath, broadly. So here it's desecration of the sacred, of buildings, which everybody is ashamed to visit. They smell of urine when you enter. They had made bigger room, not knowing India was going to become what it became. One room is cabined out in different things. There's nothing to be proud about, So if somebody brings efficiency to the building, and yes, so why should it interest everybody,
Right. So Amanji, this was amazing. I think a lot of things that, I'm sure people of a certain generation, is definitely people from my generation, people who are younger, who don't know, and a lot of people actually don't know this. There is, and as with history, as with falsified history, there are so many names, so many heroes that we've propped up. And so many people who have fallen by the wayside, like the number of architects you named, who we don't even know of, who have been critical in the building of New Delhi. So I do hope that this talk will resurrect those people. And I know for a fact that it's going to, serve to remove some of the misconceptions that we've had.
We should make a museum. We should make a museum on the making of New Delhi, because it's not something we should be ashamed of. They did a very good job, and we should give, people the information to say, there was,
There's so many people involved in the process.
Brilliantly.
So to wrap this up, Amanji, just very quickly, this is a little off the tangent, but very relevant still, since we are, going to be celebrating our 75th year as an independent nation. Amid all the clamor for an apology and for the return of the Kohinoor from Britain, how do you think India and Britain should really go forward henceforth? To sum up the entire conversation today.
I'm only an ordinary citizen of India. My voice doesn't count, but my thought, I'm glad that I share my thought. I have very contrary thoughts. I think ye samay aa gaya hai ulti ganga bahane ka. We should be now riding history cross current. We've got washed away with it, but we are at a great moment. 75 years is a moment of maturity for a nation. I myself am 70, so it's not a time to be vicious and to settle scores and to do this. I would say, since you talk about the Kohinoor, you know what the Kohinoor means? Kohinoor means the mountain of light. Right? So it would be fantastic if Mr. Modi writes to the Queen of England to say, India is full of sunshine, and we glint our eyes with the glare of the sun. Can I send you our biggest diamond as a gift for our 75 years of independence, which we got, or you gave us, or a mixture of the two, so that you have more light, meaning light with a capital L. Because if you look at it, in India, less is more. The emperor goes to the fakir's hut, lies prostrate, and touches his feet. So when you talk to a farmer, when you talk to a beggar on the street, you see a light in their eyes. There is an enlightenment of whether it's of suffering, whether it's of civilizational wisdom. So we don't need this Maya of the diamond, And I think that the Queen herself should be aware of the history of this diamond. That after the Punjab War, Maharaja Dalip Singh is 10 years old. He's got all these English soldiers standing with bayonets, and he's told to sign a paper, which is the gift of this diamond to the Queen.
A gift,
sorry.
No, I'm saying, I'm saying it's a loaded word, the gift, because it was not really a gift. He didn't have a choice.
So it was coerced out of him.
Yes.
And his mother, Rani Jindal, is in jail. So there is no choice. But they brandish it because it was a jewel from the jewel in the crown, which India was. Today, India is not a jewel in their crown. So this is a symbol of an inheritance of loss, if you want to use Kiran's book
Yeah,
title.
Kiran Desai.
Kiran Desai's book title. The Kohinoor is an inheritance of loss, a symbol of that. Why would they wear it on their head? You know, because there's some awkwardness in flaunting it. Don't you think so? I will also suggest that we should turn every symbol of slavery in India into a monument of magnanimity, if we can. Say, for example, let us name one road, Herbert Baker Marg. There used to be the Baker and Lutyens roads near the Gold Market and Baird Road and all that, which have since changed their name. But let's give them honor for whatever they did. And if that philosophical moment arrives, and if the British royalty think that, you know, they're not short of diamonds, you know. I think they are 2,900 diamonds in that one coronation crown, you know. So if they think that by moral right, India deserves it, they give it to us, we should reciprocate. We should put the statue of Lord Hardinge, which is rotting here and there, into that canopy from which King George V was removed. Because it's a European structure, the proportions are right. And to fit Gandhi into that cage, to prove a point, it doesn't make sense. You know, Gandhi is a fakir. And a fakir.
Yeah, he should be given that place of.
Yes, and Lord Hardinge, by the admission of Lutyens, Baker, by history, by my elaborate study, the correspondence, he is the father of Delhi. We would not have had New Delhi because when the war broke out, the British said there are no funds. So we stopped it. So he goes all the way, it's easily said, he goes all the way in a ship. He meets King Emperor George V. And he said, at the Darbar of Delhi, Your Royal Highness, you had promised your subjects capital. A king emperor never goes back on his word. So he gave him a prick of conscience to say that you have to continue. And they argued. He said, but there are no funds. He said, that, sir, is my responsibility. We will put, so they actually, if you go through their papers, they did what many ministries do, you know, when you run short in this thing, you put it in that thing. So there's one correspondence in which they say, how do we make more houses in the president's estate? So they said, then let us produce a paper, say when a visiting head of state will come, he will have at least 30 or 40 people staying with him. Where will they stay? Because there were no hotels then, you know, the Ashok Hotel wasn't there. So let's make houses for them, which we will use for our people. So they did a lot of, and Hardinge did this. He wangled all this. And then they said, we're still short of funds. So they said, okay, there were houses and garden house and garden house and garden. Every alternate house was removed. There is Satish Grover, who was the principal of the School of Planning and Architecture in Delhi. He got all his students to go through all these papers and research. So what they did was that two houses became one. So the house moved to the center and the garden became much bigger. So today people are saying, what forward planning by Lutyens? It has nothing to do with Lutyens. It's the budget constraint and the decision that was taken by Hardinge to see the project through, because otherwise they would have made little bit and the whole thing would have stayed. So this is again ignorance on our part, you know. I think we should do that. And there is a statue of Edwin Lutyens, which is put inside Rashtrapati Bhavan, which I think need not be there. It could be put in a museum because you cannot dishonor the honorable and honor the dishonorable.
Right, absolutely.
And I also think that this whole thing about knighting people, you know, because when a British High Commissioner comes here, and I have, from my grown-up days, let's say from 1977, I met Sir John Thompson. So when I go to the British High Commission and meet Sir John Thompson, what is my first reaction? You know, you kind of want to be on your knees and say, sir, or something, you know, because they're just people. So then there's their names which are so familiar. You know, you have Sir Robert Wade Gary, Sir David Goodall, for whom I arranged an exhibition. In fact, Lady Gateway was one with whom we arranged this exhibition in Shekhawati as the youngest member of INTAC, to bring Sir Bernard Fielden from England, who was head of the Ikram Institute, to this whole restoration thing. And they kept telling us things like, if a building is broken, you cannot repair it because you can't show the intervention. You have to do it in different materials. It can be chrome, glass, something to say, this is what it was, this is what it is. But that is the rule which comes out of a dead civilization. In a living civilization, if half your world falls down, you've got the bricks, you've got the mortar. I mean, we have to decide our own decorum and our own format, Then there was Sir David Goodall, for whom I arranged a wonderful exhibition of watercolors and all this, and did the most extraordinary auction, the art auction, calling the chairman of Christie's when Sir Michael Arthur was there. So now the new High Commissioner who's come, he's not yet knighted. He's a charismatic young man. He's called Mr. Alex Ellis, and he relates with the people on the street. I asked him over to a meal, and he met Jaya Jaitley, and she sent me a little Insta thing of him eating dosa on the road and saying it's fabulous. So I think that England has to come off its high horse and talk to us as brothers and sisters. And we were never on a high horse. We are only on higher moral ground.
Always been higher morally, yes.
Yes, so we must hold hands and go together, What is a diamond? Let us send them many diamonds so that they have much more light and enlightenment, and that the world ahead becomes a great place.
I think that just about, sums it up, Amanji, because like you said, I think, a lot of water has gone under the bridge, so to speak, and we have always been a morally superior nation. So I think, let us be the nobler of the two, and join hands and just march forward as brothers or sisters, as the case might be. So Amanji, I'd like to wrap this up here, and I just want to say thank you for sharing so much invaluable information that I think should prod us to start thinking seriously about how narratives are built and histories are shaped, all thanks to the ego or hubris of a person or a nation or a culture. And that's why these conversations are important, so we can do away with some of these myths and misconceptions. So
perhaps to a publication also, the government could produce a publication, because all the things we've said get lost on the air.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Thank you. It was a great pleasure talking to you.
Yes, Amanji. Thank you everyone for joining us. Please subscribe to our channel. If you're, if you're a drifting browser, please subscribe to our channel and do like and share widely. We are available on all social media platforms. So until we meet again, namaskar.
Namaste. We hope you enjoyed this Citti Media content. Please remember to subscribe to us and switch on the notifications for this channel. For our other social media links, more content, and to support our work, please visit citti.net. Dhanyavad. Namaskar.